my last video, I reviewed Studio Series Voyager Optimus Prime, and so now it's only fitting that I review Studio Series Voyager Megatron. Now, this Voyager Megatron, Studio Series 13, is based on his appearance in Revenge of the Fallen, while the Prime I reviewed is technically based on the first movie, but Prime didn't really go through any major design changes for Revenge, so I think pairing these two up still works. Plus, I don't have Studio Series 54 Megatron, so this is all I've got. Being the Revenge of the Fallen version, this Megatron transforms into a Cybertronian tank. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any clear shots of the tank in the film itself, so I can't give a proper comparison. However, I will say that in the brief glimpses I did catch, they do share the same general profile. The only deviation I noticed is the lack of wings, since Megatron was a flying tank in the film. However, when compared with concept art of his tank mode, he's practically a dead ringer. If I had to nitpick, the angle of his side intakes is off, but that's about all I can pick out. It's been suggested that this toy was actually based on those concept images, and while I can't find a primary source for that claim, it does make sense given the similarities, most notably the side cannons and the lack of wings. Honestly, I really like the look of this tank mode. It's a very mean-looking vehicle with lots of sharp edges and layered panels. The tread detailing especially catches my eye. There's just so much going on with them that I can't even begin to understand, but it all looks cool. In fact, I'd say that leaving the wings off makes the tank look a lot cleaner, though there are aftermarket options for those if you really miss them. And yes, he does still have the exposed robot head in this mode. It was in the movie, so it has to be there. If that turns you off, you're gonna be disappointed. Personally, I think they do a decent enough job of integrating it into the design, though it is still kind of silly. The figure is primarily cast in a light gray plastic, with a darker gray bordering on black for the treads as well as the cage around the head. In addition to that, he gets some silver paint taps on the rear of the turret, as well as some bronze picking out the mechanical elements, such as booster rockets and the internal mechanisms of the treads. I can easily see someone calling this color scheme drab, but I personally think it works. Megatron in the movie is mostly bare silver anyway, so it wouldn't make sense to give him an elaborate paint deco here. Maybe he would have looked better in all silver, but I think the gray works well enough. Plus, it makes the details that are painted silver stand out more. Unfortunately, the tank is a bit lacking in functionality. He has 4 caster wheels on the bottom, which allow him to roll surprisingly well, but the turret is sadly static. Due to the transformation, there is no rotation, and the main barrel only moves downward. However, the side cannons move up and down, so there is that at least. Altogether, I'd say the tank mode is alright. It could have benefited from some extra functionality, but I think the aesthetics really go a long way to selling me on the design. Megatron's conversion process is much more of what I like compared to Prime. There's a lot going on, but it all works in manageable chunks that don't clash into each other too often. His legs form from the tank treads, while the arms fold out from the tank body, and the turret collapses into the space they leave behind. The only real issue I have is that, when going back into tank mode, it can be difficult getting the tabs on the chest, arms, and turret to all line up right. Also, be a little careful with some of the extra leg armor pieces, as they're just on friction hinges and prone to pop off if you aren't. It's nothing major though. All in all, I'd say it's a fun, clean transformation, though it does leave some issues that we'll get into shortly. In robot mode, Megatron is looking about the best he's ever been. Gone are the disproportionate arms of the leader and the giant wing kibble of the 2009 Voyager. This figure is beefy, spiky, and very screen accurate. On display in this mode is a lot more of the bronze, highlighting the inner workings of his chest and waist. It gives a lot of depth to the design and breaks up the gray very nicely. I really like the head sculpt here. All of the jagged shapes and layers are captured beautifully, especially the pseudo-crown shape at the top. What really impresses me though is the mouth. It's rather small, but not only is it picked out in paint, but the teeth are individually molded. It's a really impressive sculpt on such a relatively small figure. The rest of the design is also faithfully recreated. The asymmetric shoulders are somewhat subdued, but still lend him a striking silhouette. I also really appreciate the effort that went into creating his legs. Having all those tread components collapse together is a clever way to get across the weird pseudo-digitigrade look he had in the movie. You can even split the front of his foot in half to give him his toes, though you can still leave them pegged together if you don't want that. Going around to the back, the same silver from the tank mode is still present, as well as his jetpack from the movie, also done in silver. Unfortunately, these thrusters don't form the rear of the tank, but I don't think there's a way they could have done that while still having a clean robot mode. Though clean may not be the best word to describe it. While the backpack is very smooth, his torso is visibly hollow from the sides. It sucks, but I can deal with it. It's only really visible if you look at it straight on with nothing in the way, so it's hard to see in most poses. Plus, I don't see any way they could have prevented this, since there isn't much room for extra paneling inside. Then again, if they'd gone with the winged tank design, then the wings could have stored in here and filled out the space better. That is what the aftermarket wings do, after all. Moving on to articulation, he has a staggering amount. Of course, he has a ball-jointed neck, universal shoulders and hips, bicep and thigh swivels, 90-degree elbows, and digitigrade knees. In addition to that, however, he gets articulated fingers. His left hand is in two parts, allowing him to open and close his claws with impressive range, and he even has a jointed thumb on his right arm, even though he has no proper hand. Also, not only does he have an ankle rocker, but he has outward hinges on the toes, though the tolerances on my figure mean that the extra armor bits tend to get in the way. Still, it's a nice touch that gives a bit of added detail to his tread feet. Of course, Megatron is equipped with the pincer arm he had in the movie. It's very nicely detailed, with lots of molded in joints and mechanical elements, and of course the fusion cannon inside done up in silver. While it can't transform into a normal arm like in the movie, it does still have the previously mentioned jointed thumb, so it's not completely useless as a hand. Though again, aftermarket upgrades exist if you want him to have his normal arm. And of course, he has his flip-out blade weapon, which he infamously used to stab Optimus through the back before shooting him down in the forest battle scene. At 8 centimeters, or 3 inches, it's impressively large on him. Along with his fingers, the blade is done in a soft plastic, so there's little danger of breakage or injury. Still, the blade is nicely detailed, with jagged edges and more mechanical details. It even has some surprisingly sharp points to it, though I doubt it could do any actual damage. Studio Series has put a large emphasis on scale, so naturally some size comparisons are in order. When standing upright, Megatron stands around 8 inches tall. Next to the less than 7-inch tall Optimus Prime, he's about a head taller in proportion. While that does seem strange, as near as I can tell rewatching scenes from the movie, that is accurate scale. With his fellow Decepticons, the only reference points I have at the time of this writing are the original Revenge of the Fallen toys. Once again, Megatron is a head taller than Voyager Starscream, and he's also twice the height of Deluxe Soundwave. It's hard to tell how accurate this is based on the movie itself, especially since he never shares any screen time with Soundwave in this form. But judging by comparisons I've seen with their current Studio Series toys, this is a little off. Starscream should apparently be the same height as Megatron, and Soundwave's head should be above Megatron's hip. It's not drastically out of scale though, so he should fit well enough with your older toys. Like the rest of the Studio Series line, Megatron comes with a backdrop displaying a famous scene from the movie, in this case, the forest fight scene. While I don't think it's an exact match for any particular shot, it does match the overall scenery of the sequence really well. Though strangely, the top left corner of the image seems to have a much lower resolution than the rest. You can see the jagged pixels on the highest branches, while the lower branches are smooth and crisp in comparison. I don't know what that's all about, but I've seen it on other copies, so I don't think it's just an error on mine. As usual, you can stand Megatron in front of the backdrop, and he fits pretty snugly on the platform. Fortunately, he tends to be pretty stable thanks to his gigantic heels, so there's little danger of him toppling back unless you put him in some extremely back-heavy pose. Once again, there's no room for another figure, so you can't get any active melee scenes, at least not without additional support, but just posing the figure on its own, it's a good look. Studio Series 13 Megatron is a really well done toy. While it does have some minor issues here and there, he's screen accurate, highly posable, properly scaled, basically everything Studio Series sets out to be. Combine that with an engaging yet smooth transformation, and this is probably the best representation of Revenge of the Fallen Megatron to date. Of course, whether this figure is worth it to you depends on whether you like that movie's take on Megatron in the first place, and if you didn't, then this toy isn't for you. However, if you're like me and are a fan of this design, I would strongly recommend him.